Okay, so today learning about nested loops. And nested loops are basically loops inside of loops, so think inceptions. Now for I in range, let's do this. Print, print I. And now if you run this, it just outputs our range here, right? Basically it runs the loop 3 times, and I takes the value 0, then 1, and then 2. Now if I want to turn this into a nested loop, what I can do here is for j in range, and let's make this 2. And now this, the first line here is now or line 3 is the outer loop, and line 4 is the inner loop. And of course I have to add a colon at the end here, and then I do print I, j. And now if I run this, what happened here? Print ij, print. Oh. Indentation. So it outputs I, this is this one, and then it does the j range, 0 and 1, and then it does the second loop of the outer loop, and then it begins again with the inner loop, outer loop, inner loop, and then the third round of the outer loop, and then again inner loop, inner loop. Okay? So if, for example, I turn this into a 10, you'll have 10 zeros here first before we get to the 1, and the 1 will also be again 10 times. So let's just do this. See what you see. And it just runs the second loop. So it begins the first loop, and then it starts executing the second loop until it is completed, and then it goes to the next round of the first loop. If I turn this around, let's just make 2. That will be exactly the other way around. So now I have the 0, and then so outer loop, inner loop, still the same loop in the outer loop, but next loop in the inner loop, and then once the inner loop has completed, because it's just 2, it moves on to the next outer loop. Now one thing I can do here is for row select. For row in range 3, for column in range 3, and then print row column and equals that. And then this, go back one with the indentation, print, and now look what we get. A nice grid. Right. So the row, if I change this to 4, change it back to 3, and change this to 5, like this. So here it adds more rows, here it adds more columns. And this is a simple way of creating a kind of like table or grid, and the outer loop is rows. This is the outer loop, and the inner loop, which is this one, is columns. And then you can make patterns with it. So let's say for I in range 5 column, for j in range +1. So simple step. And then we do the print, column, and then we do the print star and equals. And then we do print. And now we have this. And of course we could do 20. I will run this. Right? So create this nice star pattern. And the outer loop determines how many rows we have, and the inner loop determines how many stars are in that row. So the outer loop is always the command basically to repeat something, and the inner loop is to repeat something within the first or within each round of the loop. And you can think of the outer loop. So let's do this. Outer loop, and here we do inner loop. And you can see this thing still runs because we've prefaced it with a hashtag. So it's a comment. And you can think of the outer loop like when you imagine an analog watch, the hours hand, and the inner loop like the minutes hand, right? So in order for 1 hour's hand to complete, first the minutes hand needs to run through all the values. And another way of thinking about this could also be to think of the outer loop as months and the inner loop as days. So each time a new month begins, it will first run through all the days of the month before it then moves on to the next month. And then at the beginning of the next month, it again begins with the first day of the month, and then runs through all the days of that second month before it then moves on to the third month, and so on and so forth. And one thing you can do here also is, for example, if you have students and then these brackets, intro and mic, and then you have subjects equals math and English, and then you can do for student in subjects, for student in students, that's the outer loop, and then now the inner loop for subject in subjects. And so now you do the print command, open bracket, student, studies, subject. And now if you run this, Peter studies math. Peter studies English. Mike studies math. Mike studies English.